Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul?
and Jolene. And today we're talking about player knowledge versus metagaming.
Sounds good.
I'm not sure that it's really player knowledge. I think it might be character knowledge. But it's really hard to distinguish between the two.
Right. I think one of the biggest problems, not a biggest problem, obstacles or hurdles to do when you're role playing is playing somebody that's not you, right? And that's tough. I mean, I remember, like, I think I've admitted on the microphone that I used to just play a different version of myself when I played D&D for the longest time. Even space opera and stuff like that, I wouldn't try a different personality and stuff
But
like
now
that.
he does try a different personality. And
Well,
sometimes I don't like it.
I try to get out of the, I don't know, I would describe myself as probably a chaotic good paladin in a certain sense, right? I have a certain set of morals. I have a certain set of
You sound like Liam Neeson. I have a specific
skills.
set.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have those kind of specific skills. That'd be pretty cool. I do have, everybody has a moral code that they live by. And on top of that, I try to be a good person, but, I don't want laws holding me down, right, kind of thing. So, I look at myself and being chaotic good, and every character I played, I always would play a chaotic good character because I thought it was the most freeing of all the good alignments.
I would also play a chaotic good character. I always thought everybody would do that until I met some people's. And then I realized that some people don't do that. They would play like a neutral evil.
And that would surprise me, right? I mean, I've never played an evil character, so I might play an evil character or slightly evil, or now that they're doing away with alignment, I'm pretty sure dubious moral compass. So if it's pretty tough not to play yourself, and I think it takes a little bit of practice, it takes a little bit of a leap of faith or whatever, I don't know what you call it, a leap to play something other than what you normally would play or a version of yourself.
The whole reason that we're having this conversation
Yes.
is because I was looking around for topics and I saw this conversation or this question this person asked. Because what's the difference between knowledge that the character has versus what the player has? And he said that he was in a game store playing a game at a table, and next to him, when his group was on lunch, he was just sitting there eating his lunch that he had just gotten and waiting for the rest of the people to get back. And he heard an argument at the table next to him. The argument was the GM was going, your character wouldn't know that. You don't know what that monster is. You're metagaming if you're telling me that you already know what the monster is. And the player said to the GM, but it's in my backstory. I wrote it down specifically that I knew this type of a monster. And the guy that's asking the question or making the comment says, well, if that would have been me, I would have gone, oh, okay. I guess I missed that part.
Right. Like we were talking about, yeah. I think it's probably the most challenging part of role playing. Challenging part for the GM to adjudicate is depending on how egregious this faux pas is, having knowledge that your character may not be able to achieve or have, is metagaming, right? Is the player will know a certain amount of stuff, and that character may or may not. Now, usually this happens in a fantasy role playing game, and of course D&D is probably the most popular fantasy role playing game out there. So this happens a lot because D&D tries to mimic this medieval fantasy world, right? Western European medieval fantasy world. When you're talking about that situation, usually you're dealing with people who, most people in that world, that kind of world, a fantasy world, a medieval world, are not very much educated. So what is metagaming, right? Well, using the player knowledge that the character wouldn't necessarily know. Now, this can be really like little things that the player knows and the GM doesn't really care too much about. I don't know. I can't think of it as anything right now. But that's the difference. That is what metagaming is. That is a player using knowledge that their character wouldn't know and using that knowledge in the game. Now, that's an interesting example that you brought up because the person had this knowledge about some monster, right? Let's say it was a troll.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't a troll, but let's say it's a troll, and the guy goes, "Oh, we gotta use fire to kill a troll, otherwise we can't kill it."
And it was very interesting because in the comments, this was in Reddit, there were a whole bunch of comments, and they struck me as interesting because I had never thought about this. But the characters do have knowledge of their world.
Yes.
And not necessarily just what the GM thinks they do, right? Because I didn't think about it like if you lived in a town, there are bards come through, right? Or if it's a town where bards come through, or depending on where you live, you've probably heard about trolls. Somebody has told you a story, and in that story, they kill trolls with fire. So you know that. But Saul says, well, what if it's a bad bard who got it wrong and says that you kill trolls with salty water? Then you're going to have a problem when you go up against that troll. The point is that the character in the world probably has a lot more knowledge about their world than even the player does. And I think that's why they put in roll lore, you'll have to roll your knowledge of blah, 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 right?
Yeah, I think that would make sense from third edition on, but in early editions there was no skill roll. So, I mean, it all depends on the world, right? It depends on how much knowledge everybody has and where this village is or where this person comes from. We were using the Wheel of Time when this discussion. Jolene and me were talking about the Wheel of Time. At the very beginning of the book, at Edmund's Field, where the main characters all come from, they don't believe in Trollocs. They think they're fairy tales.
Right, because the Glee Man comes through and tells them these stories, right?
Right. Well, I would say most of the people, right? Because there was somebody who fought in the war.
Tam did know what a Tam
right, and believed that they were real. But because they were the
isolated.
wars or whatever had been such a long time ago, and they were isolated and far from where these Trollocs, they call them, but they were basically like ogres and orcs and bad things come from. They hadn't seen those kind of creatures or monsters in hundreds of years. So they basically had fallen into the area of myth, except for the guy who had actually fought in the war and the Glee Man, because the Glee Man was very, very knowledgeable about stuff, about history and stuff.
And he had been in other parts of the world where there actually were Trollocs.
Correct. But in that little village, most of the kids didn't think they were real.
So I was telling Saul that I think that the idea of a bard coming through and telling stories could happen, right? Because that happens all the time. Whenever the tinkers come in and sell their pots and stuff, they're going to tell you stuff that's going on in the world. But I told him that I think that Robert Jordan did a really good thing in that book, in my mind, explaining how these mythical characters that you believe are mythical, when, they're telling you a story, they are telling it as if it really happened. But in your mind as a kid or in your village where you're hearing these things, you've never seen anything like that. So it's not like when that Trolloc bursts through the door, you don't have any idea what it is until you realize that, oh my gosh, they weren't lying to me.
They exist. It's pretty funny. I was just thinking about the M&M commercials where they goes, they exist with Santa. I think Jolene's right. I think it all depends on where the characters are, where they come from, how big is this country or the town that they live in, a village even. And it all depends on the relative safety of that village. Are they near some moors where trolls live? Then they might have knowledge about how to dispose of trolls. If they live in a sandy desert in Barstow, California, where trolls don't usually frequent, there's no swampy areas. I don't know if trolls love swamps, but it seems like they do.
Depends on the kind of troll.
Maybe, the sand troll. That maybe they don't know anything about trolls, right? They may know how to kill scorpions and stuff like that, but as far as trolls, that's a totally different matter. So there's all these questions we don't know about that particular incident, but what it was interesting was that the player goes, it's in my backstory, right? Well, I think the GM in this instance was very probably didn't read the backstory, one, and two, maybe forgot about it, right? And I think those things kind of do happen from time to time.
Well, and then apparently he handled it wrong, according to the person
The
telling the
consensus?
story.
Because
Because he says that then they argued for 15 minutes and then the table broke up and didn't finish their game because the player and the GM couldn't
come to
an agreement on this.
Well, a lot depends on how egregious this situation is. For example, usually that's an argument that happens all the time.
Right.
For even at my table, it's happened all the time. It has not all the time. It has happened in the past. Another thing is when a player says that something is very
common knowledge.
It's common knowledge, right? I have a player who's really smart, right? Went to college, biology degree, blah blah blah, and is very handy. He does a lot of stuff with woodworking and can basically a very handyman type person. We were in an D&D game, and I think he plays the cleric, and there was some situation where he wanted to use either pulleys or pump hydraulics stuff to get something done.
To lift something,
I think it's to lift something. I don't remember what it was. But I was like, well, would your cleric know that? I go, specifically? He goes, well, everybody knows how to do that. I go, describe to me or tell me what you're doing. And so he described and told me what he was doing. I said, I have no clue as to what you're talking about, Steve. So it can't be that common knowledge. Now, his common knowledge is stuff that he's done all his life, whether he was very interested in woodworking. I'm not a woodworker. I don't know a table saw. I could probably fix a car, anything earlier than 1985, better than Steve. But that basic knowledge is not there for us woodworking or vacuum or pulley systems and stuff like that. So what he thinks is common knowledge may not be common knowledge to everybody else simply because of his knowledge base.
So that's the basic dilemma, right? The GM is thinking, are you doing that? Are you telling me this as the player or as yourself or as the character, right? Would the character know this?
Right. And then we got to look at, if we're talking about still fantasy games, so if it's a game that's modeled after Western Europe, medieval Europe, education isn't on the top of a lot of people's lists. Most people did not go to school. Most people did not read. When you base common knowledge and then you're coming from a society like ours, that most people in Western culture go to school for a specific amount of time. Here in the United States, it's 12 years usually. I mean, you could drop out, but most people are able to hack through 12 years from kindergarten to 12th grade to the graduate high school in the United States. Now, you can argue how good that education is, what they cover, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, my brother was able to take Latin or Greek. When I went to high school, it wasn't even offered, right? So there's differences in high school education, but still, you still learn 1+1 and all that other stuff, right? You still get some very good general knowledge of history of stuff like that happened. Whether you absorb it or not, that doesn't matter.
But most people come out being able to read.
Right, at the very least.
Yes.
Not everybody, because some people do have problems, but for the most part, yeah, you could read. Now, medieval Europe, hardly anybody read, right? I mean, that was one of the things about being a monk or a priest is that you could read and write and stuff like that. I think it's very hard to put yourself in those kind of shoes as a player, unless you're really thinking about it, right? You're always, would my character know this? Okay, and it all depends on what kind of character you have. Like if you're a prince or somehow attached to the court, you might have some education. But if
most
you
likely
are a farmer's son,
most likely not.
Well, you could probably know how to birth a sheep and know how to feed cows and pigs and know the difference between what to feed a cow and what to feed a pig and how to kill a chicken.
Is there a difference?
Actually, there is. Usually pigs don't eat grass.
Okay, that's why.
And they root, right? Because they eat worms and stuff and grub and stuff like that. Where cows will eat grass and hay and stuff like that. Yeah. And they have the 9 stomachs or 7
stomachs. They have 4 stomachs.
Whatever it is. The rumen and the lumen and the stuff I only know that because I took some agriculture class. So they have 4 stomachs to help break down the grass because it's roughage is real difficult.
We don't, so don't eat grass.
Yeah, it's very tough for us to eat grass. I mean, there's a different base of knowledge, and some of it may be useful.
Well, it's like today, right?
Okay.
If you grew up in the country and had cows, maybe not today. When I was a kid, I grew up in the country. There were cows. and they taught
Delicate
you how to
animal
milk
cow.
them.
Delicate animal cow. Delicate.
And if you're milking a cow, you know to stay away from the leg that's going to kick you, because that's just an important thing to know. Otherwise, you're going to get kicked. But most people that grow up in a city don't have that knowledge.
Well, they wouldn't even know how to milk a cow, would they?
Probably
How
not.
to grab the teat and squeeze it in the right
Make sure
way.
your hands are warm. Just a tip number one.
That'd be tough for me. My hands are always cold now.
The idea of what people know even today is different depending on where you live and what
That's
you do,
true.
right?
Yeah, even today, right?
Right.
I mean, some parents make their kids do all kinds of stuff, right? From cooking to woodworking, even. I forget who it was. Some little kid. He was someone in the family. He was very good at. Oh no! It wasn't in our family. It was our neighbor's kid. So the neighbor, he had a little boy, and he had a couple girls. They never wanted to do anything with him, so he made sure that the little boy was like he was a boy, man's boy, whatever, his son. And so he would make him he'd grab a hammer and nail stuff, and he was like tiny.
Yeah.
He was like 2 or 3 years old. I was amazed at how good this kid could hammer stuff because he was a neighbor for a while. And by the time he was 5, he's like hitting the heads on nails, doing all kinds of saw and everything. I mean, he was 5 years old. I'm like, you're not worried about him cutting his fingers. His dad was like, he knows what he's doing. So obviously, his knowledge base by the time he's 15 is going to be much different than mine, who all I knew was how to play Pong, right? My Pong before I even got my Nintendo. I mean, not even Atari. So everybody's going to know a little bit of different stuff, but still, for the most part, I think when you're looking at fantasy world, most people are not going to be educated. Most people are not going to be able to read. And I think a lot of that is hand-waved in most games.
Most of the time, yeah, because unless, and I have noticed this, the only time that GMs really like, if there's a situation where you're not actually in the scene or whatever you want to call it, like,
Yes.
GMs will go, "You're not there," or Saul always says that, "You're not there," and then everybody shuts up that's not there, so that the people that are there can figure out the situation, right? Or the other one that I've noticed is especially when monsters come along, right? For D&D, that a lot of people have read the monster manual and they're trying to figure out which monster it is so they know what to do, right?
I've never read the Monster Manual. I mean, I've looked at it only because I'm a DM.
To find out monsters,
Yes.
yes. But the boys have read it all.
From cover to cover, and any monster manual or bestiary there is.
And
That
a
was the
lot of people do that, so they
lot of
know what
people
the
do that.
monster is, and it sometimes it really upsets GMs
Oh, yeah.
that you have taken the time to memorize all the monsters, or you've come across these monsters before, and you want your character to know what they do and how to defeat them, right?
Yes, because I think, I don't know, I mean, we always played that way, that you shouldn't look at the monster manual. I remember looking through the monster manual going, oh, look how cool this thing is. But it was never for the intent of using that knowledge to be able to defeat the monster later on. It was always just because I was just curious. I mean, I'm talking about the original monster
I think that's
manual.
why most boys or girls look at the monster manual.
Yeah, I don't know about that nowadays because they were very, because a lot of times I wouldn't memorize it. I just got, oh, that's pretty cool. But our boys definitely memorize the thing from cover to cover. They go, oh, this is a Aracola. I'm like, oh, jeez. that kind of situation. I mean, other things can happen too, like, and this is not a problem. Well, it could be, but it's easily. It's a lot more easily solved than the medieval problem where people don't have the knowledge and the character doesn't have the knowledge and the player does. But like, let's say in a science fiction or in a military game where a player, like this came about in a military game where they're playing Twilight 2000 and they're supposed to be ex-military, or they're supposed to be military people. And the tank shows up and the players, all they have is a Humvee and a machine gun mounted to the back, a 50
Caliber.
machine gun. And two of the players jump in the Humvee or the Jeep, whatever it is, and they rush toward the tank and shooting the machine gun at it, right? And of course the tank turns its turn and blows them up, kills them. So
Okay, I'm just gonna say that's probably common knowledge.
well, Now, I kind of, through my selection of movies that I've seen and stuff, I know that for the most part, tanks aren't previous to any kind of small
Arms fire.
arms fire, right?
Well, they are armored tanks.
Of course, and from the front, right? And I doubt you could probably shoot a gun.
And the turret gun on a tank is much bigger, right?
Oh, it shoots a big old huge shell,
Yeah.
right? An artillery shell of some sort. And anyway, and the GM felt bad because afterwards he was saying, "Well, none of these guys have any experience in the military, none of them, right? And obviously they've never seen a movie where there's a tank involved."
I'm thinking that the GM should have said, your character's not gonna do that because
Well-
that the tank is going to take out your Humvee.
And your bullets are not going to do anything to it, right? I thought it was kind of funny that the person said this, right? And he felt bad afterwards. He's like, "Man," he goes, and then he thought about it. He goes, "Oh, these people don't. Only like a couple of them have ever even like seen military movies. I guess I don't know where he was playing or how old these people were. But even that, you kind of laughed when you said, yeah, you can't attack a tank with guns or small arms, and even if it's a 50 caliber, that's just that big machine gun.
Yeah.
And those bullets are big, but
Yeah.
armor is
They're
there.
not that big.
Armor is there to protect the people inside of it. I mean, there might be a lucky shot somehow. I don't know what.
You'd have to take out the person in the turret and then somehow like get
but
something
the guy,
inside of
the guy,
inside of the tank to take out the other people. Right?
well, the turret guy is not sitting on the outside.
No,
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought it was a very interesting problem, and he felt really bad after that because that was the Humvee was the
Was there transportation?
was their transportation and how to get out of the battle. Basically, it was a total party kill because then the tank just hunted down the other people and shot him up with a machine gun that's built into the side of the tank. He thought, well, I think that characters would know not to do that, and he felt bad because he goes, I didn't think about it at the time. I was just adrenaline was pumping and it was excited, and then the idea that what happened afterwards was almost a total party kill. And I think as a GM, you have to be cognizant of that kind of knowledge, right? Well, in the space opera or any kind of
I was going to say in Shadowrun.
Okay.
Right? Well, because everybody has a vid glasses at the very least if they don't have something jacked into their head. Everybody at least has vid glasses, right? Or
they have that.
They have
what do you call it? Oh my god! It's the little communicator thing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually they either see stuff or they can look up anything, and so the character knowledge is going to be much greater than the player knowledge.
Oh yeah, yes.
I think in a military game, it would be the same thing, right?
Right.
If you're playing people that are in the military, you're going to know basic things like a tank is going to take out a Humvee. Don't shoot at it, right? You'd have to have some very special. You'd have to have you're going to hit it with a rocket or what's
A bomb.
You need to hit it at a certain area. People are going to know these things.
Yes.
I'm just saying. I'm not even in the military, and I know these things.
That's what I'm saying. I go, well, I mean, they must have
They
not
could have been young, and never
That's
seen
true.
a military movie.
Might have never
before.
seen Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
I mean, if you watch that movie alone, that'll tell you everything you need to know about tanks and people.
Tanks are much bigger, and they're going to take you out.
Don't bother shooting at it, right? At a tank, right? And then in space opera, I'm thinking in the universe of science fiction. Of course, same thing, right?
Yeah.
There's a ton of knowledge that is available to the player.
Is
the
it
character also?
Is it space opera or is it Traveler, where you can ask the computer things?
Well,
Maybe I'm thinking of Star Trek.
you think of Star Trek, right? And I think what happens is that in space opera, which is weird because that they didn't never talked about that, right? They never talked about, and computers were huge, right? They were the size of rooms,
right?
They couldn't think about, well, maybe computers could be really small, but anyway.
Well, that's because of when the game was created,
1981, yes. And Traveler, I think the same goes for Traveler, right? They never not that I know of. I think
Star Trek was in the 60s.
I know.
So these people could have looked at it, right?
Yeah, I think they're also thinking of a burgeoning,
more like Firefly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That tech level.
Your junk ship getting up into the.
It's exactly right. Right. Exactly. So the tech level is not as high. I don't want to get into science fiction, but usually in science fiction, there's tech levels.
Right.
And that limits what technology is available to the people
To the
playing
people
the game.
playing, yeah.
And usually tech level 10 is the highest, though Traveler put 10 as the highest, and then later on goes, well, they could be 12, 11, 12, 13, and 14, depending on how high you really want it. So,
But if you're playing a game like that, the character knowledge is going to be a lot more than the player knowledge.
yes, in certain
because we're sitting on Earth.
right, yes. And, you're talking about going faster than light, and
Yeah.
how do what do you talk about? Well, gobbledygook, you push this button, and you go into hyperspace or whatever, or warp drive, or trans warp drive, or whatever it is. In fact, in a lot of games, I think somebody made up a chart for like Star Trek, where they talk about, well, get the condenser and use the hyper wrench to limit the quantum mechanic overlays. So it has all these words, and it's called the gobbledygook it's the technobabble
Yeah.
thing. So just so you could talk and it sound like it's actually something when it's just total BS.
Well, just as an aside, when I read this thing about Voyager, when they were making Voyager, the Star Trek show, that some of the characters, and probably on all Star Trek shows,
The characters, the actors.
the actors were given scripts, right, about these specific. They're supposed to say specific things about what they're doing to the ship,
And had no clue what to talk
and
about.
they're reading the things, and some of them are like Shakespearean actors, and some of them are like regular actors, and so they're looking at it and they have no idea what they're saying, and they memorize the lines and they say it, and then they would have technical people saying, okay, this is what it really means, so that they would have some idea of what they're talking about, right? Because they're delivering the lines but they don't know what they're saying. So that's how I think of when Saul's saying, there's a chart. I'm like, I can see that, right? You would have to deliver the line as if you had a clue as to what you're talking about.
Of course, right. And you got to make it sound. It might have been on Firefly, actually, because it's kind of tongue in cheek, the whole idea. But I think what happens is that we're talking about knowledge that we don't even have, right?
Right.
In traveling in space and hyperspace and stuff like that. The other thing we do know is the world, right? We know that things work.
Yeah.
We may not know how they work,
Right.
right? So the how doesn't really matter. It's just that things work that way. It's harder to metagame in that kind of world, but also the reverse is true, right? The player has less knowledge than the character.
Yeah.
Especially like if they're playing like a astrophysicist, even though we do have real astrophysicists here, but intergalactic astrophysicists that deal with anomalies out there. And so when you're there talking or they're figuring things out, the player may not have even the iota of idea what's going on, but the character does, and that's why you have some roles for skills and stuff like that, and not entirely based on what the player knows, because the player don't know nothing usually.
So the same thing applies to when you're playing fantasy role-playing games, right? D&D. Players can have some knowledge, like when you say you're going to camp by the side of the road, most people have gone camping. I know there's some people who have never gone camping, but in California, at least, when you're in 5th or 6th grade, you get to go for a week of camping.
Well,
sort of in a cabin.
In a cabin, yeah, in a real cabin.
But most people I know have gone camping, so they know how to start a fire. They know how to cook over a fire. They might not do it well, but if you grew up with the people that I grew up with, you learn this kind of stuff because there's not always.
Or you were a Boy Scout.
Yeah.
Or Girl Scout.
So there's different things that you probably know about camping, and a lot of people have not. So and then they say it's set centuries, right? A lot of people have read books about this, right? So you have some knowledge.
Yeah. Well, you.
So it depends on the amount of knowledge that the character has and what the GM wants to. I don't really think it's Well, it could be metagaming, but I don't think a lot of the things, the knowledge stuff, is metagaming. It's like Steve, he says, everybody knows this. It sounds like something my Uncle Wayne would say, right? Everybody should know how to do this.
Everybody should know the difference between the cubic zirconia and the real diamond. No?
No?
I'm raising my hand. Looks like the same to me. I just bought a $3,000 cubic zirconia.
So just like the player's knowledge is different around the table.
Yes.
The character's knowledge is going to be different around the table. So they wrote it in their backstory. You should have taken the time to at least glance at it and know that
It's very difficult,
This
though.
is my favorite enemy.
Well, it's obviously very important to the player.
Right.
They're going to remember it.
Right.
The GM is looking at maybe 4, 5, 6,
Yeah.
depending on the table, 8 characters. Yeah, there's going to be a situation like that where not everybody knows the common knowledge, right? And the idea of common knowledge is not so common, right? Just like common sense.
All I know is one time we were looking at a trebuchet or something that looked like a trebuchet in a game, and everybody at the table except maybe Alan and Augustine knew what a trebuchet was, and was like dying to. And so I was like, "No, you do not know what that is." And everybody, and even though Steve and I for sure knew what it was, and we're like, "Oh, we know what we can do and how this works," and but you can't say, "Oh, this is what you're going to do," because you've never seen it as a character, right? As you come up on a wall that's being sieged by.
I don't remember that. I mean, I don't remember that scene, but you're right. That's the kind of situation that I'm talking about is where you got, well, my character really wouldn't know about what a trebuchet is.
Right.
Because they've never been in war.
But I was sitting there going, I know what a trebuchet is, and I can't say anything.
I mean, a catapult. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's different. A trebuchet definitely looks different than a catapult.
Yeah.
And it'll look. I mean, a catapult. Well, you could bend a stick and or use like.
But
a
you still
sling.
wouldn't know what a catapult was.
Yeah.
I mean, you may have seen one somewhere, but most likely you haven't been around a siege.
Well, I mean, a catapult. Oh, I understand how that works, right?
Right.
You're bending this piece of wood, it's going, right? But a trebuchet, you're like, how the hell does that work? Has this looks like a windmill or something, right? I don't know, because it kind of looks like a, what do you call those things? A teeter totter. I don't know. It was a big basket with rocks in it on the one end. Anyway, so you're right. So what can we do to help this, right? This situation. A lot of the onus for me falls on the GM. These things can apply to both the player and the GM, right? How to prevent it? Number one, listen, right? What's going on? What exactly are you trying to do? And then listen why that person might know that stuff, right? And then try to understand is the second one. You can listen and but then try to understand what the person is telling you and why. And understand that the GM is in charge. I think both sides, the GM, unfortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, is in charge of the tables, in charge of the game, and they have to adjudicate the rules one way or another. Well, and the situations. I mean, that's just the way it is. Also, remember there are other players at the table, like this situation at the game store where the GM and this player are arguing for 15 minutes. That will kill a freaking game.
Yes.
Not only will they kill that session, it may kill the freaking campaign because people go, man, I got into it with the freaking GM and all we did was just sit there and listen. I'm like, who's going to want to listen to that? And then another thing is you can change your mind. The GM should have listened to that guy, understood what he was saying and say, oh, it's in your backstory. Oh, I didn't remember about that. Okay. I can see how or why you would know that. All right. We'll
move on.
Let it go and move on. One, it lets that player have a little win, right? A little one. And then the fun doesn't stop, right? The game continues. How long will that take? Maybe a minute for that explanation, for that change of mind. Instead of 15 minutes and it kills the game. And like I said, it might even kill the campaign. Unless it might have been a one shot, but I doubt it, it seems like. And then, like I said, it all revolves around people having fun. If you're stopping the game for 15 minutes arguing, and I use the term discussion in my notes, but these guys were arguing at this point because neither one would back off. So I understand that the guy had it in his backstory. I understand that he should have had, his character did have knowledge about this, but when the GM says no, and you can tell they're not going to change their mind. I mean, how many people really do change their mind after 2 minutes of discussion?
Right. Once he's told them that it's in my backstory.
And then again, the GM still said, oh, no, it doesn't matter, or whatever was said. I can't even imagine what the reply was, because then the GM is really like, oh, I got caught, whatever.
Oh, I didn't read all the backstory. Damn it.
Right. And then I maybe it's an ego problem or whatever situation. You're not going to win. Drop it. Right? You go, okay, fine. And then the game continues. And then after the game is done, you say, you know what? I really, this is the problem that I have, and explain it to them and discuss it with them. Try not to get heated. Try not to get what is it, your ego involved. Because once that gets involved, there's no discussing people. There's no discussion.
Well, it sounded like that GM was that personality type where he wasn't going to take
Right.
whatever you said.
I've been in those shoes too, and I've also. But see, what happened when my sons and his friends were reading through the monster manual? They're like, oh, they're talking about it. I go, just remember that just because the monster manual says it's a certain way, doesn't mean in my world it's a certain way. That's not the way it works. If I have a genie or a dingeon or whatever the monster is or whatever the obstacle is, it may not be the same as it's written in the book.
Which used to frustrate them completely.
Yes. No, actually, I don't think I ever changed the monster.
No, you didn't.
But that idea was stuck in their head, and they were like...
And every once in a while, they still bring that out. It might not be the way that we think it is. And it just makes me laugh in my head because I'm like, okay, he really got it into their heads that, his monsters might be different.
I think if you look at it that way, through those kind of eyes, with that kind of intent, we're supposed to be having fun. Right. And I think that is the best way to handle everything. Look at it through that lens. And then as a player and as a GM, you open your ear, you listen.
And also as the GM, listen to what the person is saying. Maybe they shouldn't have that knowledge, but maybe their idea is so cool that whatever. You might go, oh, I never thought of it that way. Maybe they do see that. Maybe the character does look at it from that perspective and go, oh, this is what we could do.
Yeah, exactly. And like the player was talking, if he had some prior knowledge before something had happened, they might know how to kill a troll. That we keep stabbing it, the troll wouldn't die, and then somebody had a torch as the only thing to defend it, and it stayed away from it. And then when we burned it, we noticed that the burn never healed. Oh, then douse it with fire, and then it worked, right? All it takes is one time to be successful.
Well, yeah, or if the bard did tell the story about people killing a troll and they killed it with fire, and you're looking at what you believe is a troll, and you're going, I have this in the back of my head. I heard that this is how you kill them, right? From the storyteller that came through town. Then you're like going, oh, well, let's try because nothing else is working.
Right. I mean, and it totally makes sense and it totally works. Like I said, it sucks when it does happen, when both sides don't want it to back down, but people should remember that it's supposed to be a fun thing. That guy at the game store, the GM, probably wrong in my eyes too. Didn't want to back down, but the player too. At a certain point, you're not going to. How long does it have to be before you get the idea? Oh, this guy's not going to change his mind.
So you either need to walk away or sit down and finish playing the game and discuss it later, depending on if it's a friend or whatever.
And how important it really is.
Right.
I mean, it really is to the overall
Does
game.
it really matter?
Does it really matter?
Yeah, because sometimes people just are in the mood that it does matter, and sometimes they're like, okay, I'll let it go. So there you go. Player knowledge, character knowledge, and GM
metagaming
knowledge. There you go.
Just not killing the game over a dumb argument.
Just try to have fun. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.